G'day guys. This video is on what really lowers homocysteine levels. Homocysteine levels are associated with a lot of diseases and a lot of both neurodegenerative and a whole lot of other things, cardiovascular and endothelial dysfunction. So the list goes on and on. So what we're going to do in this, we're going to look at some research on omnivores, vegetarians and vegans. And we're also going to basically check out an old video that I came across some time ago, done by Michael Greger. Yes, that veg-tarded Vagoon himself. And, that he actually discusses this issue. It was quite surprising that I came across this. He actually talks about a vegan that died at 66 and was one of the big hoo-has in the vegan movement in the US. But the interesting part is this guy was vegetarian for large parts of his youth. In his mid-20s, he changed to a vegan diet. And supposedly, according to Greger, he stuck to the vegan diet for 40 years. With a lot of, trying supplementations and all sorts, like the top end do, injectables and all sorts of things, but still died at the age of 66. Now that's way lower than most, sad dieters die at, which is quite horrifying. If you think that that a sad dieter, a big, fat, unhealthy, smoking, drinking, processed food eating, sad dieter can outlive a Vagoon and the head of one of the leaders of the Vagoon movement. Shocking, isn't it, boys and girls? Shocking. Yes, that boys and girls sort of is trademarked by Bart K. I'll just give him that. Anyway, let me just share the screen and we'll get into this. Okay, let's start and listen what the man has to say.
Now contrast Dave Thomas with Jay Dinshaw, founder and spokesperson of the American Vegan Society.
So this guy is was one of the big, chief Vagoon.
Just a tireless advocate for the animals, a true inspiration.
But not for the human animal.
But I never got to meet him because...
Oh, God. A tear just ran down my cheek. Horrifying. Poor Greger. Never got to meet his idol.
He died too, apparently of a heart attack. He was 66 years old.
Shocking. Absolutely shocking. How could a Vagoon on the perfect species diet, according to the Vagoons, die at 66? Absolute shock horror.
What? Died of a heart attack? How? Never ate a burger in his life. Raised vegetarian vegan for 40 years. Made me stop, gave me pause.
He was shocked. His idol died at 66. Never touched a burger. Never even sniffed one. Shocking. Can you imagine? What a poor, miserable life, missing out on having some nice meat patties. Makes me hungry. What can I say? Yes, shocking. Let's move on. I mean, he just goes on and waffles as he usually does about his idol, and he's trying to come up how. Then he goes back to the literature, he tells us, and checks it out and tries to find out what the hell is going on. Let's just check that part out. Oops. Get to the right spot.
difference between the mortality rates of meat eaters compared to the mortality rates of vegetarians. No difference.
No difference between, plant-based and sad dieters. Shocking. Absolutely shocking. What is happening? It's a conspiracy.
But wait a second, it doesn't make any sense.
To a Vagoon, it doesn't make sense. You gotta give them that. You gotta be sensitive. It doesn't make sense to a crackpot.
What are the top 3 killers in the U.S.? Heart disease, cancer, stroke. How could we be dying at the same rate as meat eaters?
How can we be dying at the same rate as those meat eaters? Now, obviously, what he's talking about, he's not really absolute meat eaters. I mean, a lot of them are actually nowadays doing 70% plant-based, 30% meat, and a lot of that meat is highly processed and incorporated in, really, let's say, junk food. And, most stuff is coated with breadcrumbs and stuff like that and all sorts of things. You buy your different meats that are breadcrumbed. You buy your fish, which are breadcrumb. We're talking about shit food with seed oils and all sorts of things. So, no different than the Vagoons or nowadays some of the Vagoons that have gone on what we call the plant-based sad diet, vegan junk food 2.0. Basically the plant-based meats or substitutes or mimicking garbage. Let's put it that way, because that's what it is.
Doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. Well, obviously, you're a Vagoon. Why would it make sense to you?
Well, there are 3 findings I'd like to investigate with everyone today, and that...
So he would like to investigate the 3 findings. Trying to get it to the spot.
Same mortality rates from stroke, heart disease, same.
Same. You heard it. Heart disease, stroke, all the big killers, cancer.
Different, same. Okay, well.
So basically everything the same, They don't live any longer than the sad dieters. They are dying at the same rate on all these major illnesses. Bar 2. Now let's find out exactly how well they do against the sad dieters on these 2.
At least out of the list of the top dozen or so things people die from, there were at least 2 classes of diseases for which the mortality rates were significantly different between vegetarians and meat eaters.
When he says meat eaters, obviously we're talking about here sad dieters. Okay, we're talking about the general public that eats garbage. Okay, we're not talking about people eating an ancestral diet. They're not part of these epidemiological, junk science. The Vagoons are running these. Remember, out of all the major institutions, they've infiltrated academia, the Vagoons, and running, a pro-plant-based agenda. They are doing all the epidemiological studies. They're infiltrating everywhere. I've been, keeping tabs on a number of researchers and really who they are and what they're doing. It's endemic, unfortunately, and it's not going to get any better. The research, as we can see, has been corrupted so badly, and it's going to get worse and worse. But, they need to stop. They need to call them what they are. They are sad dieters who are eating 70% plant-based and 30% animal-based junk food. That's what they're really eating. And the vegans can't, even the vegans that are not doing so much junk can't compete with them. They still are dying at the same rate. That should be, an alarm bell should be raised amongst that community to say, God, these people are doing a sad diet. We're doing a cleaner diet and we're dying at the same rate, can you imagine the future vegan death rate? Is it actually going to go up now that a lot of the younger vegans have adopted the junk food 2.0, fully blown plant-based junk food, which is what it is? Their death rates are even going to be higher in the future. You wait and see.
Unfortunately, they were not in our favor.
Oh, how shock horror. They were not in the favor of the Vagoons. Oh, God, I'm shocked. Oh, absolutely shocked. Let's continue. This is enjoyable.
Some of the data suggested that vegetarians seem to have a 50% greater risk of dying from breast cancer.
Vegetarians, plant-based is what he means. He changes and interlux this. You'll find that later on when we actually talk about homocysteine levels and all that it's much higher, because these are basically groups that are basically looking at, they're doing on plant-based. So he'll call them vegetarian. It just suits the narrative. The reality is that it is about homocysteine, and he does talk about it further down, and he actually has to admit the bad levels. So let's just make sure, clear that up. The further away you live from an ancestral diet, the worse you get.
For example, but that was explained away by the fact that vegetarians tend to have less children, which is a well-known risk factor for breast cancer. So
absolutely garbage. Absolutely garbage. My mother never had any issues with breast cancer or anything like that, and she actually had her kids very late. She was one of those rare Greek women that basically had her kids in her late 20s. She got married in her late 20s and had my sister first of all, and then me nearly, her last kid in her early 30s, or young early 30s, yeah. So, this is bullshit, absolutely a red herring. People in the past have had kids later on or early and all that. We never saw, until we actually got rid of the animal food, so we never saw this severe. And there were women in the past that were having kids in their 50s. My grandmother had kids in her 50s, okay? So this is absolute bullshit, and they're all healthy. Because my mother, because her earlier, younger kids, actually, a lot of them died due to high infant mortality due to warfare, starvation, all sorts of things of warfare at the time. Greece went through a lot of upheavals, war of independence, and then a continued war, one war after another for a very long time. So, this is bullshit. It's the diet. People having kids at very later ages, nothing to do with that. It's the fucking diet. By the time you actually get to those later years, you're actually quite sick because you're eating a species inappropriate diet.
Vegetarianism probably has nothing to do with breast cancer.
Bullshit. I can tell you, it's more significantly correlates, than basically some of the other garbage that they dish out.
It's a mortality. I just want to make that clear.
But because we talk about mortality here, death is death. All the other stuff, the epidemiological garbage, they do special adjustments. We're doing adjustments to the data to work out what likelihood of people dying. That means putting in their biases in their calculations. But death is death. And we know that basically vegans and vegetarians have higher breast cancer rates. That's well established. So, you either have cancer or you don't. It's not something you can rubbery say, or death or stuff like that. It's not something, you either have death or you don't. You either have cancer or you don't. It's not a rubbery figure, an adjustable figure, or, I wonder what it is. Bullshit.
Second finding is less easy to explain away. They found that vegetarians had over twice the risk of dying from degenerative brain diseases like.
Exactly. We know that. The brain fog vegan. Everybody knows a brain fog vegan. Let's be honest about it. Only when you start eating species appropriate does a brain fog go away.
Alzheimer's disease. What? First of all, the fact that the only two differences were more vegetarian deaths, that's upsetting in itself. But what's this about vegetarians having twice the risk of dying from mental and neurological disease?
Told you. Yep. Even Gregor knows that they are dying at twice the rate. You know, they basically are suffering twice the rate of neurological disease. Even Gregor can't hide the fact. He knows it. Obviously, he'll come up with some bullshit thing about omega-3s and B12 and all this sort of stuff and supplements. We know they're toxic supplements we take. Bart's covered it about their, the omega-3 algae shit and the B12 sort of supplementation, all that. In many cases, it's, he's been promoting cyanocobalamin, which in some people turns into cyanide. Friggin' hell. They lose the plot on many levels. So let me just go to, because you can only endure Gregor for so long before you feel like basically, topping yourself. Okay, so the big findings that he actually found is, we know these, Garth Davis, hip fracture, remember? He stepped out of the actual bath and fucking, yeah. Was it a mess? There's plenty of vegans with excessive hip fractures and fractures of different sorts at a much younger and younger age, way beyond, even younger than sad dieters. Shocking. Exactly. Even the sad dieter who's only eating 30% is still getting more protein. And we're talking about 30% junk, slop in most cases from fast food joints and whatever else. And you can see the key ones, vegetarians live just as long as, meat. Oh, God, he can't even spell meat. M-E-E. He's thinking about a meeting with his brain fogged mates. Oh, God, shocking. And he's an academic and he can't even spell meat. Oh, God, what can one say? It must be brain fog. It started from back then. God almighty, it explains a lot, on his, the exercise sort of treadmill thing. It really explains a lot. He needs to be able to focus. Is sort of yeah, God almighty. One can only laugh or, just cry in despair about how these people can be have such cognitive dissonance. So pretty much the man of the Vagoons himself admits they're dying at the same rate as sad dieters. They've got twice the neurological diseases. And we know even more when it comes to breast cancer, even though he comes up with some bullshit thing, no proof whatsoever. Oh, we'll just make it up. They do it with other things, so what the hell not? Vegetarians have twice the hip fractures. We know that. How many, even some of their leaders, basically current leaders that are basically in their middle ages, are having major issues, major fractures and stuff like that. So, this does not surprise anyone in our community, Okay, now let's just go here.
Going back to here, you'll see, if we have a lot of omega-6 in our diet and not a lot of omega-3s, it might lead to more inflammation in our body.
There you go, all that bullshit about the omegas. Obviously, if you're on a plant-based system, obviously you're going to have problems. Seeds, nuts, and most foods that are basically or most fats in plants are loaded with omega-6s. Even if he talks about the oils, taking out the oils and all that, I'm not going to go into that because it's just annoying listening to the absolute bullshit and idiocies. You know, fuck walnuts and hemp and all that. I mean, walnuts have actually got more omega-6s than omega-3s. I mean, for fuck's sake, how fucking stupid can you put that in there? But anyway, he's a cockwomble. There's the sort of repeat people. Remember the repeat people? Here's their concern: using aspirin to prevent the inflammation. Just don't eat sugar and you won't get the fucking inflammation. You won't need the aspirin, you know? I mean, that's what the repeat, I thought about throwing in there a bit of repeat garbage, how they talk about using aspirin to stop arachidonic acid from basically, it doesn't cause inflammation. Unless you're inflamed, you are not basically, the chemical messenger arachidonic acid isn't going to basically go down the pathway of basically creating things like prostaglandins and all that. Where on a species appropriate diet, you've got low inflammation, this doesn't get activated. Only in a crackpot's mind it does. Or if you're on a species appropriate diet, then you do get that inflammation. The solution for the repeat lunatics is to basically take an aspirin rather than eliminate the inflammatory issue, food, which is carbohydrate, sugar. Anyway, let's move on.
And that's why a lot of people with inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, etc., actually take like flaxseed oil therapeutically in large doses.
God, flaxseed oil. God, some of that stuff is so rancid. You know, by the time you actually process flaxseed oil and then take it, it's rancid. It's why some even in their community have wised up to this and basically take flax and actually grind it themselves to use it in their food so it doesn't oxidize. I mean, oh God, crazy.
Doses to kind of tip their balance over to the non-inflammatory side. And
oh yes, give us a break. Anyway, let's move on. Oops.
homocysteine. The homocysteine story started in 1968 when a Boston pathologist by the name of Coleman McCauley saw these two kids.
So it's going through the history of homocysteine. So his focus is on, and we need these things, the anti-inflammatory, the B12 and all that sort of stuff. You'll go into that sort of stuff and all that. But even though these people are injecting B12 and taking rancid omega-3s and, you know, rancid algae crap and whatever else, still not resolving their problem, because you gotta eat the food that is species appropriate for us.
It's always bad when pathologists see people because that means they're dead. An 8-year-old boy and a 2-month-old infant both died of massive strokes. Turns out they both had a genetic defect which led to abnormally high levels of this toxic metabolite called homocysteine, which led to these damaged cholesterol-clogged arteries in these little kids. And, you know, Dr. McCauley sat down and said, you know, I wonder if this homocysteine stuff has some role to play in adult heart disease as well.
So as you can see, it's got a point there about homocysteine. It's exactly what they see. So if you've got that genetic situation, you drive homocysteine high up, it clogs your arteries. It basically drives atherosclerosis. What foods actually cause? It's the kibble diet. It's the rancid oils. It's all those things that actually are driving. It's a lack of species appropriate foods that basically, you know, not only the methyl donors, but what I'll get into shortly, which actually explains the real big culprits. It sort of explains historically why we moved from a 50% animal-based diet to a 30% animal-based diet, and a lot of these things got worse, significantly worse. even though we've been heavily supplementing with B vitamins and all sorts of things, and we've still got higher homocysteine levels. So what gives? So we're supplementing more these vitamins, these B vitamins, and all sorts of omega-3s and all sorts of things, and we still can not bring under control our homocysteine levels. They're getting worse. They're rising in the population, and people are getting sicker. We'll get to that shortly. You'll be surprised what really matters to bring down homocysteine levels. Well, methyl donors play an important role. That's true. But that's just basically to run the processes. The methyl donors act a bit like cofactors in the whole scheme of things, but it's not the whole story. Okay.
Well, he, like many brilliant discoveries in the medical field, he was laughed at and ridiculed for years, but now we know. Now we know that homocysteine is a vasculotoxin, meaning it directly damages our blood vessels. Even moderately elevated levels of this toxic substance have just been shown to be a setup for heart disease. Right?
So even moderate amounts, we're not talking about high levels here, even moderate amounts are very dangerous for heart disease, okay? The man himself, the man of the hour, is telling us high homocysteine will kill you, is a neurotoxin, is a vascular toxin. That means, blood vessels and all that. So let's continue.
So now the goal is to have a homocysteine level under 10. This is just micromoles.
So basically, that's the goal. Well, that's the official line, that it should be under 10, 10, no more than 10. In the low carb community, most well-versed or, smart doctors that have done that have looked into the research data and all that, know it should be 7 or less. So, and I agree with them. Homocysteine should not be over 7. It should be 7 or less. And if you're on a species appropriate diet or a low carb keto diet, or even some low carb paleo, keto, or general low carb or carnivore, basically most people are reporting homocysteine levels way below even 7. So basically in our community, you could say, according to Gregor, we are 100% safe from this neurotoxin, this cardiovascular endothelial toxin. Yes. Now let's just see what else, what other goodies. He's making our case, isn't he? He's really making our case in terms about how bad a veganurized lifestyle is and diet.
Per liter, it's kind of how we measure it. Again, this is a toxic substance, so we want low levels in our blood. And so if you look at data from 2001, for example.
Remember what he said, low levels in our blood. That's important. I'll come back to that because that's what we want, because the goons can come up with other bullshit potentially in the future after this video. So I want to make that point quite clear because that's what the research shows. It doesn't show it in any other sort of, what happens in the liver, because that's where a lot of these processes take place, and these methyl donors, are working their way and are creating all the SAMI and all these other different metabolites are being produced. That's not important. You want them to go up because that's where everything gets sorted and cleaned out, and all the different metabolites get sorted out and stuff like that. You don't want it in the blood because that's when it's going to get to the brain and cause damage. It's going to get to the heart, cause damage. It's going to get to other organs, cause damage. It's going to be in your bloodstream in itself, causing damage. It needs to be processed. It needs to be in the liver higher. You want it lower everywhere else. Anyway, so that's important. and that's well established. So don't let any vagoon try and come up with some other bullshit.
Meat eaters have an average homocysteine level of 12.
This sort of data is from the US. I will show some European data, which is slightly different. So this is US, okay? This is people on a SAD diet, okay? And the US has got one of the worst SAD dieters. They are the worst. So you can imagine, you know, what this means in comparison to the vagoons if theirs is worse. You know, it just basically blows their whole argument. It means that all that epidemiological garbage, which they come up with, that they adjust. And we know Bart's actually looked at the Seventh-day Adventist bullshit and actually saw that actually a lot of it was inversed. I mean, people eating more were actually not dying in the and the other ones were dying at a higher rate, actual real deaths, you know, but they were adjusting. Oh yes, we adjusted, you know. Yes, they always adjust because the truth is too painful. And the cute furry animals need us to adjust the data for them.
Not so good. But ovo-lacto vegetarians had a average homocysteine level of 16.
That doesn't surprise me.
And vegans, 19.
Yep, you heard it, 19. Nearly double that of, I actually got meat correct here. God, at least he got it once right. It should say SAD dieters. It should not say meat eaters. That is actually, you know, false. People eating 30% in the US, 30% of their, you know, intake of food is coming from meat products. The rest is coming from plant-based products. It's more or less, you know, at most, you could call it a semi-vegetarian or semi-plant-based, but it's definitely not a meat-based diet. God almighty, the bullshit that the vagoons come up with.
Houston, we have a problem.
Oh, vagoons, we have a problem.
Seems that people with homocysteine levels as high as 16 are at threefold risk of dying from a heart attack.
16. Threefold risk. 3 times higher at 16. Remember, he said just small amounts.
It's been estimated that if we just had a 5-point drop in homocysteine levels in this country, we would save the lives of 56,000 Americans every year.
Did you hear what he said? Just 5, a reduction of 5. That means going from 16 to 11, which is getting close to the European standards. I'll show that of omnivores in that sort of part of the world. And still, you know, people are eating shit, unfortunately, nowadays, even in Europe. And you basically can see that the vagoonerized, you know, threefold compared to the SAD dieters. No wonder they're dying younger, like 66, one of their top leaders. I mean, if their fucking top leader doesn't know how to survive longer, how would the rest of them know? You know, I mean, how crazy is that? I can remember one vegan that was actually in his 90s and he actually died, but he hadn't been a vegan for very long. He had been a meat eater most of his life. It was just towards the end where he switched over. So he had a lot of reserves and all that. At the end, he did that. It was a bit like that bodybuilder that was meat-based and lifted weights and then decided at 95 to basically start eating less animal products. And basically he thought he was healthy and doing actually track and field, you know, marathons and all that, which is very catabolic as an activity. Plus you're eating foods which are less nutrient dense. And obviously he just lasted for 3 years and he died, you know. So those people are irrelevant, okay, because basically they are really They don't tell you. They're basically just people that at a later age, for whatever reason, got into their thick skull to decide to become vegan or vegetarian or something like that. But the reality is, when you look at people who start young, they don't survive very long. And not only that, they suffer a lot of irreversible health problems. We know a number of people, that were ex-vegans that talk about this. I'll go into it more in the future about a lot of these colorful characters and what happened to them as well. But this is just, this is the top man. If he can't get it right, well, there's no hope for any of the vagoons, is there? Died at 66. Remember that, vagoons.
And as bad as vegetarians have it, there seems to be an epidemic of the so-called hyperhomocysteinemia, or too much homocysteine in the blood of vegans.
Did you hear that? There's an epidemic. It's at epidemic proportions. I wonder why. Shock horror.
And it's not just a vasculotoxin, it's a neurotoxin as well. It kills brain cells.
Did you hear that, vagoons? That is where your brain fog and your degeneration and brain shrinkage is coming from.
People with homocysteine levels over 14 are 4 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease.
Over 14. 4 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. You heard it from the man himself, from the lips of the great McGregor himself, the great vagoon, the treadmill vagoon. 4 times. Don't you forget that. And that's at 14. That's below somebody on a vegetarian diet. That's somewhere between a sad dieter and a vegetarian. Forget about a full-blown vagoon.
And so this homocysteine is where we think the bulk of the blunting of our heart disease benefit comes from. This homocysteine is...
As he says, the blunting, we've got our cholesterol low, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're eating the flax, we're doing that. Bloody hell, what's happening? It's this damn homocysteine that's undermining all our efforts. We're doing everything perfect, but it's the homocysteine that's killing us. I wonder why. They're not engaged. If you can think, a vagoon is not engaging the Randall cycle. So they're yes, there are issues of deficiencies and all that, but there is also this issue of homocysteine, this high level of inflammation that year by year increases in the vagoons, and increases because they can't clear it. And I wonder why. We'll have to wait and see a bit longer.
Is also where we think that our increased rates of degenerative brain disease come from as well.
You got it. You got that? That's when you go cuckoo, cuckoo, and you can't work out who you are, let alone who somebody else is. Yes, brain shrinkage and degeneration.
Because of our dangerously high levels of homocysteine. And the same thing with heart disease. Yes, we have substrates. Pathway number 1 involves a vitamin called vitamin B6. Pathway number 2 involves a dietary component called choline. And pathway 3 actually uses 2 vitamins. One's called folic acid or folate, and the other is called vitamin B12.
Okay, he's talking about this. Actually, it's 2 main pathways. This pathway is a sort of like a two-lane pathway, but it's interlinked, interrelated, and it has a supportive role to this pathway. But this one here, if you have the MTHFR gene, riboflavin sorts that out and actually upregulates the actual enzyme. And I've done a study and I pointed that earlier. So you'll have to go and see that at some other point. The choline one I haven't done yet. The choline one, choline, yep, is the other portion. And the B6 side as well. Now, let me just try and find that other part so we'll get just to look at that, just to look at this sort of foods we're talking about for these sort of nutrients, which is really important. So we just share that. So we're looking at B12, you know, when we're looking at B12, you know, it's all the animal foods. I mean, we'll go down to this is not a full list, obviously, but you can actually see, you know, it's just wall to wall. I mean, fortified soy, give us a break. Fortified cereal, that's just garbage. In many cases, a lot of this doesn't even get absorbed, all these fortified foods. These are the real foods: tuna, beef, eggs, dairy, real dairy, not this fake dairy. Pisses me off that they use this sort of fake dairy rather than real stuff. You know. Then when we're looking at, we're looking at B6, which he mentions and talks about. Again, salmon's at the top, chicken, that's fortified, pork, beef. So it doesn't have much, you have to eat quite a bit of that. So again, and from plants, less bioavailable in comparison. But basically, the top four, because that's fortified, so I consider that a cheat. The top four are basically animal foods, and there are a number of other animal foods that are not in this list anyway, which is an important thing. Now, go back to the top. And we've covered that one, which is meat as well. The riboflavin one, I'll just do that, and I'll do folate last. So again, you know, it's all the animal products again, which is the top sources. That's bullshit. It's fortified. Milk products are very high, you know. So basically, a 16-ounce glass of milk, real milk, not this bullshit, raw milk, will give you about 100%. You know, the sort of pasteurized will give you only a 69, 70%. So it drops a bit. But as you can see, mushrooms, which isn't really a plant, it's actually a fungus. That's bullshit, that's fortified. So pretty much in the top 5 out of the top, 4 out of the top 5 are animal foods. That's nonsense, with all the anti-nutrients and everything else in it. So, but anyway, that's the vegan option. But it's not going to really help them that much. Oops. And folate. Obviously, here we've always got the plants that we're always talked about and all that. It just pisses me off that they have it in this sort of way. But let's look at the highest in this list here. We'll go with the common 100. Oh, these are all the fortified stuff. Absolutely. It is annoying. These are all fortified garbage. And then we start hitting the animal products after all the fortified stuff. Well, you're not going to eat dried spearmint like basically 100 grams, not going to happen. So, lamb's liver. So we can, for instance, that's pretty much 3.5 ounces will give you a certain amount. But there's also a very important thing, choline. Choline will be converted. For most people, it goes from methionine to choline to folic acid. Folic acid is the man-made shit, to folate. Okay? So your body can convert it. If you give it enough methionine, it will actually convert right through for most people. Or choline, it'll convert right through. And choline is very high in animal foods. So on their normal list for whatever reason. When we're looking at choline, there you go. Breast, salmon, pork, eggs, beef, shrimp. That's 8% per 100. You'd have to eat shitloads of beans. So, and shitload, 7% of 100, that's 3.5 ounces. You'd have to basically, to get anything out of that. And 8% was the beans. So 100 divided by 8 times the grams, that's 1.25 kilos of beans to get your choline for the day. So that's bullshit that he says, that you can actually get choline. Absolutely bullshit. Divide that by 28 point. As you can see, that's 44 pounds of, I'll tell you one thing, the neighborhood would be very smelly. The Vagoon neighborhood, if you did that. Again, the superiority of the animal foods is just telling in that regard. It's just a point that had to be made, that the superiority of the animal foods will always outweigh, in that regard. The percentage of people that can't do that conversion between choline and is a very small percentage of the population. It varies between 2% to 4%, depending on who. It's a very small. It's primarily populations that consumed shitloads of animal organs, like some of my ancestors, which basically means that you have a strong dependency on eating those sort of foods. Otherwise, you can't get it. Otherwise, so it's just one of those things. It was down-regulated because they consumed too many of those things. Luckily, some of my relatives in the villages still do, which is probably what keeps them healthy in that regard.
Pretty much everyone gets enough vitamin B6. It's found widely through animal and plant foods. Same thing.
As we saw, that's bullshit. It's more in animal foods.
With choline, found widely through the animal and plant.
That's another bullshit. I just showed you the choline stuff. Even beans, you'd have to eat shitloads. That's just bullshit. In the fortified stuff, yes, you can find in the fortified stuff, or supplemental. You can take a supplement. That's another option.
Kingdom. But folate is found almost exclusively in plant foods and
liver and other organ meats.
There's vitamin B12, as many of you know, is found almost exclusively in animal-derived foods. This
So before supplements, I wonder how those longevity vagoons that ate tubers, how they got their fucking B12. I wonder how. Even Gregor knows that it basically comes only from animals.
folate is the reason why meat eaters are stuck up at 12, right? They're just
So his excuse is not that these people are sad dieters, that they're stuck up at 12. No, it's because they don't get enough folate. I'll actually touch on that. You'll actually see soon what I mean, because when I show the European data, it'll click, okay, about the folate bullshit. Because remember, you can convert methionine to choline to folate. The majority of the population, 96 to 98%. It's only that small amount of people like myself and a few others that don't have that conversion capacity, because our ancestors consumed excessively. It's like the Irish, which have got a low beta-carotene conversion. Again, their ancestors consumed a lot of cod liver, so they had a lot of retinol in their diet. And so it downregulated the carotenoid conversion. Anyway, let's move on.
It's not eating enough fruits and vegetables, not getting enough folic acid. But this, vitamin B12, is the reason we have such terrible rates.
God, he's shocking, isn't he? You know, we know that. We've been pointing this out for ages to the vagoons. It's the reason why you guys have a lot of mental issues and brain degenerate, brain shrinkage, and all sorts of things. You know, because of your, nutrient deficient diet. But do they listen? They even Gregor admitted it back, a decade ago. Doesn't talk a lot about these things anymore. Have you noticed? Just talks a lot of shit. This is when he was still in the early days, in those romantic years of early vagoonery, and he was talking to his own people in a theatre, in a lecture theatre, and trying to give them ways of basically improving their vagoonery lifestyle.
Of hyperhomocysteinemia, we have such dangerous levels of homocysteine. More and more evidence is accumulating that we, vegetarians and vegans, are just not getting enough vitamin B12 to adequately lower our homocysteine level.
Nope, that's not it. Even though they supplement, it's not coming down. And I'll explain why soon.
Levels. And it turns out for vegans, some vegans aren't even getting enough B12 to avoid the classic B12 deficiency disease.
Did you hear that? Some of the ultra vagoons are not even getting enough to basically, just to keep their brains from not going into, let's say, complete degeneration.
Right? It used to be thought, you don't need to worry about your B12 because you need so little, and it's kind of on everything and you store it up for years. What's the big deal? Severe irreversible brain damage. That's the big deal.
You heard it from the man himself. You will become cuckoo.
Well, what about herbivores like gorillas, right? They don't take no B12. They seem to be doing pretty good. Well, they also eat bugs, dirt, and feces.
And bugs, remember, are an animal-based food.
If you also want to eat bugs, dirt, you may also not have to worry about your B12. But if, for whatever reason,
You heard it from the man. You should be on an insect diet. You vagoons should be eating some animal products, like insects.
choose not to, you need to get your B12. Contrary to popular vegan myth, clinical B12 deficiency, meaning symptomatic B12 deficiency, is not uncommon. And I will...
Did you hear? It's not uncommon. It's a myth that you don't need to supplement or you don't need B12. He's actually said it's a popular myth that other vagoons actually believe. Heard it from the horse's mouth.
Spare you the gruesome scare stories of the vegans that have died, went blind, were paralyzed because of not enough B12. I mean, do we want articles in the medical literature published with titles like subacute combined degeneration of the spinal cord in a 14-year-old due to a strict vegan diet?
Oops.
Poor vegan kid in Philly got paralyzed, right? Even one of these.
Did you hear that? In Philly, one got paralyzed, a 14-year-old doing a very strict vegan diet, not supplementing. What is wrong with you vegans? You should be supplementing. You should be doing the Daily Dozen and a raft of supplements to cover those deficiencies. Otherwise, you will drop dead at the age of 14.
These is way too many, right? So the evidence is perfectly clear. You either eat B12 fortified foods or take B12 supplements. Right?
You heard it from the horse's mouth, from Gregor the Vagoon.
I don't need fortified foods there, partner, because I get all the B12 I need from fermented foods like tempeh and miso and sea vegetables. No, you don't. It used to
Did you hear that? No, you don't.
be thought that lots of plant foods had B12 in it, but actually we were using a faulty test. We were using a test that didn't differentiate between active B12 and these so-called inactive B12 analogs, which look...
Got it? Got it, Vagoons? The analogs. You guys have been looking at analogs which have nothing to do with the active form. So you've been deluding yourselves.
like B12 to the test, but actually unusable by our body. So it actually, if we do take in these B12 analogs, it may actually kind of clog up our B12 machinery and act as anti-B12.
Did you hear that? So the garbage that you guys are putting into your system is actually inhibiting the absorption of the supplements. Oh, I'm what? Yeah. This is gold. This is absolute gold. I couldn't do it any better. It's coming from the horse's mouth. Gregor himself just admitting, talking to the other Vagoons. That's the nice thing about this video. He's preaching to the converted, to the brainwashed converted. So, and telling them some of the real truths about vagoonery and its health consequences.
Wait a second, can't I just go into my organic backyard garden and kind of pull up a carrot and not scrub all the dirt off? If I may turn your attention to one of the most prestigious sources of vegetarian nutrition knowledge, the Vegetarian Nutrition and Health Letter out of Loma Linda University.
This is from the University of Vagoonery.
March 2002, they had a great article called The 10 Most Common Myths About Vegetarian Diets, and myth number 1 was, drumroll please,
God. Oh, God, he drives me up the wall. You can imagine by that, you at the end of this sort of session, you'd be literally, get me the knife. I want to basically slit my wrists. I'm not kidding you.
Vegetables grown in B12-rich soil can meet vitamin B12 needs. It's a myth. It's not true.
There you go, Vagoons. It's a myth. It's not true. That's from Melinda University, and that's coming from the top Vagoon. One of your top Vagoons.
Okay, so I'll get into the nitty-gritty exactly how we should get our B12 in just one moment. I cannot help but mention
supplements. We don't need to go into it. It's supplements. We know it. Injectables and whatever else. Now, is this part?
Effects, miscarriages, blood clots, cognitive decline, depression, the list goes on. And this is data from 2001. We've got new...
So that was data from 2001. So we've got new data from 2002.
New data now, 2002, new study came out. Meat eaters were stuck up at 12.
Sad dieters, let me just clarify that, at 12.
Not so hot. Vegetarians, ovo-lacto-vegetarians, had an average homocysteine level of 17 though.
So obviously they're getting older, you know, 1 year older, and they've jumped to 17. I wonder what happened to the vegans after 1 year.
And vegans, 27.
I mean, I shouldn't laugh. That is more than double a sad dieter. That's horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. They've gone from 50% higher than a sad dieter, or slightly more than 50%, because 18 is 50%, to 27. So millimoles per litre. Now, so 19 divided by 12, this is sad dieters at 58% higher. And when we're looking at somebody at the 27 mark, which is where there are, this is the average. There are some higher, some low. That's the average we're talking about. So we're talking about some are ultra vagunarized on the homocysteine there. You know, they're really sucking on the homocysteine tit. Divided by 12. Shit. 225%. Horrifying at those levels. And remember, when you go 5 higher, so above, remember we talked about above 14. So 1, 2, nearly 3, 2.5 times, and that was a 4-fold increase. I'm not saying that, you know, could that be a 10-fold increase between 1 year and after a year? Horrifying, absolutely horrifying, those sort of levels. That's, you know, that's not something to take as gospel, what I said there, but that is horrifying, the sort of levels. You know, it should basically scare people. If people basically don't get this, there's a few loose things up here. Anyway, let's move on. Homocysteine levels in vegetarians versus omnivores. This study was done in the Slovak Republic. So we're talking about Eastern Europe. We're talking about a place where the diet isn't as bad. You know, we're not talking about the American, much more processed shit and stuff like that. So let's look at those levels. So if we look at these people's levels, as you can see, they have, the omnivores have a higher body mass index, you know, because they always say if you've got a high body mass index, you're going to be very sick, you know, this sort of bullshit. You've heard it. I mean, Bart sort of covered it recently and all that. That's the vegetarians have got slightly lower and the vegans have got slightly lower, because we know they're not engaging the Randall cycle. They're nutrient deficient. They're actually wasting away at different rates. And this is the sort of average period of vegetarianism years or veganism, the average. So this is about 9 years and there's about, 8 years. And then when we look at homocysteine levels, as you can see here, the omnivores in the Slovak Republic, doesn't surprise me, are around 10.2. Why would it surprise me? Because basically they're living in a society which doesn't have as much processed shit. That's why they're at that levels. And the same thing with the vegetarians. They're much lower than the Americans, down at 13. They also have less processed garbage, still high, still above, much higher than the official, but below the sort of 14 mark, where it's that critical point where you actually get a lot of degeneration, but slightly below. The vegans there are slightly above, but they would also have a cleaner sort of diet in that regard compared. Now, let's look at the B12 levels. Obviously, the vegans are the lowest, the vegetarians slightly better, and the omnivores, and we're talking about people that are on a mixed diet here, okay, engaging the Randall cycle. That's why their BMI is slightly higher. So they're not, you know, healthy. But if you look here, remember what the Vagoon himself, the top Vagoon, McGregor, said all about folate. Well, it doesn't actually bear this out. The omnivores have lower folate than the vegetarians or the vegans, but they've got lower homocysteine levels. The B12 is the more important one. As I've said, you should never supplement folate. Never. Get it from the diet. You don't need excessive amounts, believe me. It's overrated and all that. And that's the sort of daily intake of B12. Obviously, these people are omnivores. They're eating more animal-based products. And as you can see here, the Vagoons are basically let me just put it up there, 497 point. Yep, divide that by 216. As you can see, 2.3 times more folate than per day than in micrograms per day in sort of amounts consumed compared to the omnivores. And still, it's not helping them, is it? Nearly at 16. Not looking good. And obviously methionine. Now you always hear that animal methionine actually raises homocysteine. You always hear the vegetarian. Well, here you're actually these people are consuming more methionine and have got lower homocysteine. And the lower the methionine goes, that means the lower the animal flesh you eat, the higher the homocysteine. Interesting. Let's move on. This is a chart of that's actually been put together for professionals, basically, GPs and doctors and all that, how to lower homocysteine levels and what sort of supplementation to give people. Basically, all these sort of things. Do you really need them? No, just eat a fucking steak. You'll get all this. You'll get the zinc, you get the B2, you get the B6, you get the B12. And you will also even get some, if you have a couple of eggs with that steak, you'll get plenty of folate as well. So glutathione, yeah, we know what raises glutathione, species appropriate diet. You keep the insulin down, glutathione gets upregulated, intracellular antioxidants. As long as insulin is not high, glutathione will be high. So on a species appropriate diet, you don't need to supplement glutathione. It just comes for free from the body itself. It's not being inhibited by insulin. So let's get to the crux of the story. High quality protein can impact circulating homocysteine levels. Aberrant homocysteine metabolism has also been associated with diabetes, birth defects, other vascular diseases, cancer, and numerous neurological disorders. We know McGregor actually told us thoroughly that they are brain fogged, undergoing neurological damage, undergoing neurological decline, losing brain cells, and basically having brain shrinkage, because when you kill off brain cells, obviously you're going to get brain shrinkage as well. Well recorded and well understood. It's something now that nowadays Gregor and others and co basically avoid discussing. Now they're talking all this other bullshit, your daily dozen, a shitload of supplements. So yes. And all this about, now there's a very important thing that a lot of people talk about, you need more, cysteine, you need more, to balance out methionine. You hear all this continuously that, you can't have too much muscle meat. It's gonna fucking kill you. It's gonna really just basically raise that homocysteine level. You hear it constantly. I mean, remember the rat study that I actually showed you years ago, or some time ago, which was basically on that rat that was fed 70% protein, and just the motherfucker just grew big and strong and lean, and was just basically, it was GI rat. That was a GI carny rat on a high protein diet, high animal-based protein diet. And it was really, it was rocking it. Yes, I won't go into the other innuendos that I usually make. Try to keep this a bit more respectful. So we will move on to the next part. An actual study. Yes, a rat study. Nothing like a rat study. Salad Boy would love one of these. Anyway, increased plasma homocysteine concentrations in rats from a low casein diet. This is a Japanese study. Now, let me just go through this. Okay, rats were fed on a 10% casein diet, 30% casein diet, 10% casein diet with added 0.5% of methionine, and the other one was also 30.5% of methionine, okay, for 14 days to investigate the relation between the dietary protein levels of plasma homocysteine concentrations. Plasma homocysteine, because remember we said it's all in the blood. That's the stuff. Even Gregor pointed that out. Okay, just to make sure. The plasma homocysteine concentrations were significantly higher in the rats fed on a 10% diet than in the rats fed on a 30 C diet. So you can actually see more protein, less homocysteine. Let's move on. And this phenomenon persisted even under the conditions of methionine supplementations. Yes, remember, they've always talked about how methionine is the problem. You need more cysteine. Bullshit. That's another bit of bullshit myth out there that a lot of naturopaths and many others have been, even in our community, in the low carb community, been spreading this mythology for some time. It's BS. Now, so even under conditions of methionine supplementation, I'll show you the results shortly in that regard. The activity of hepatic liver, cystathionine biosynthesis, CBS. So that's basically, I'll go into the sort of how the liver will actually produce its own cysteine out of this process, and the sort of effects, depending on what you did, was significantly lower in rats fed 10% casein than in rats fed 30% casein, irrespective of methionine supplementation. Did you get that, naturopaths? That's an important thing. So even under methionine supplementation, that means you're not only getting the standard food, but we're supplementing methionine in there. You're supposed to actually get higher homocysteine. And you're supposed to get this imbalance supposedly between cysteine, but you're actually producing, in your liver, you're actually producing more. The body knows best. It can actually do it. You don't need to supplement. You supplement, it'll do less, but you don't need to waste your time. Just eat your fucking meat and it will produce it in the liver. So this sort of bullshit, methionine, cysteine sort of balance, bullshit. This is proof in an animal model. And then we'll go to the human model and that'll be the photo complete. Anyway, this is the first demonstration of a low protein diet increasing the plasma homocysteine concentrations in experimental animals. This is not epidemiology. This is not basically, all the other sort of associational stuff. This is actual clinical, experimental. We have the rat. We give them this. We don't give them anything else, just this, the casein and the methionine supplementation, just the protein, no other stuff to confound anything. And then we test the blood and we're surprised and shocked because the old hypothesis, the bullshit hypothesis, doesn't seem to pan out. It's the thing that most of the vegoons have been banging us over the head saying, oh, if you eat a high methionine diet, you will get high homocysteine levels. No, you won't. You'll actually get lower. And here's the proof. The first demonstration of in experimental, it is suggested that a decreased CBS activity might be associated, at least in part, with a hyperhomocysteinemia caused by low casein diet. So, hyperhomocysteinemia, which vagoons suffer severely, excessive homocysteine, basically is because of a low protein diet. Simple as that. How can this rat model be wrong? It's experimental. They haven't put anything, no confounders whatsoever, just the protein at different rates and methionine supplementation to boot. Now, let's look at the results. Okay. So that's the first one. That's the 10%. That's the 30%. That's with the methionine. And that was with the methionine. Okay. So this is whether this was supplementation. This is where it's altered slightly. Okay. So you can actually see when you actually got this, it's much lower. It's always much lower when you have more protein in there. So obviously this is only 30% casein that they're actually putting in there. But, we carnivores consume far more than 30% in terms of animal products. So, we obviously will drive that homocysteine even much lower than these sort of levels. Very important. So you can actually see SAMI in the liver, much better, and that's important with a high protein. That's another metabolite. That's the one that we were talking about before. That is going higher, which is a good thing, which is basically producing more cysteine. Okay. So that's the take-home message. That basically a low protein diet in rats. Now, let's go to humans, because this is where it gets really interesting, because at the end of the day, we are humans, we're not rats. But it's really important that in all mammals, it seems that a higher protein intake seems to do the job. Now, some animals have got certain processes which they can extract better from different sources, but humans, we are not herbivores. We basically need to get it from high quality, which is animal-based. So effects of protein and methionine intake on plasma homocysteine concentrations. A 6-month randomized control trial in overweight subjects. So, okay, so background. A high plasma homocysteine concentration is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease and a raft of other things, as McGregor told us quite clearly as well. Let's not forget. Homocysteine concentrations are thought to be raised by high protein and methionine intake. That's, hold on, let me highlight the proper part. That's the myth. That's what we've been told for years, that high homocysteine concentrations come about from high protein methionine intake, high amounts of protein, eating shitloads of animal products. We've been banged over the head many times. And even some people in the low carb community believe that and actually reduced. They went for the therapeutic 10% of or 15% protein. They were too scared of protein. And they were raising their homocysteine levels. And this explains why some people, even in the low carb community, have underlying levels of inflammation, which they just can't get rid of. And they don't know why their homocysteine levels are high and why they're not being eliminated. Well, it's because you're not getting enough fucking protein. Eat your fucking meat and don't be scared of meat. Anyway, let's move on and look at the objectives. Our goal was to investigate the effects of a high and low protein and methionine intake on homocysteine in overweight subjects. Wonderful. Design. 65 overweight subjects were randomized, assigned to a 6-month intervention with a low protein, low methionine diet. 12% of total energy, 1.4 grams of methionine. High protein was 22% of total energy. So they're talking about basically, and that's the sort of thing, that some people get on a therapeutic level. They consume very low protein levels. This isn't even that high as far as I'm concerned. I believe in higher amounts. They call that high, basically. That's basically, 22%. Give us a break. Both of which had similar fat concentrations of 30%. Obviously, the rest was coming from carbs, unfortunately. So, but even under mixed thing, it still performed better. And that tells you something, how animal foods are protective. Even under the, the carbohydrate component that would be in there, because it's, 22, 30. So which is 48% carbohydrates even on the high. So the remainder would have to be all that. Anyway, all foods was self-selected at a shopper department. Protein intake was increased in the high protein group, mainly through lean meats and low fat dairy products. So you can see, the rest of it was carbohydrate. Dietary compliance was evaluated by urinary nitrogen excretion. So they looked at the nitrogen levels in the urine to make sure that they were consuming the high protein through that period of time and they were compliant. Anyway, homocysteine concentration did not change significantly in the low protein or control group. So they had a control group, which is very important. So the low protein group and the control group, so basically, didn't really change. And that doesn't surprise me because most of the control groups are on a SAD diet, which already is low in protein. So it did not surprise me that they would be very similar. But we're 25% lower in the high protein group. So homocysteine levels were no significant change, but were 25% lower. That's important. That is really important, It's like having 25% is 3. That means you're down to 9. So from 12 to 9. So, because this would have been in the, where was it? Copenhagen. Well, that's, it's not Eastern Europe, which is a cleaner diet. Western Europe is pretty much no different than the US in many regards, especially places like Denmark and the Danes and stuff like that. They eat crap, like very Americanized in that regard. So they would have probably very similar homocysteine levels to the Americans. So we're talking about reduction of 3 millimoles, which will bring them down to 9. So they're just below the what they call safe, but I think 7 and below is the actual best zone. But it's still way better than what most populations are nowadays. So homocysteine concentrations after 3 months interventions were inversely associated with B12 intake and with weight changes. Multivariate analysis performed on all the stuff, but not with methionine or protein intake. So, you know, they had inverse effects. So basically, even the B12 didn't actually have, you know, it was inversely associated, didn't have the impact. So even if these other people that were getting some B12, it didn't have the impact. Because basically, as I've said, folate, choline, B12, and all that, they're all methyl donors. The part of the actual, these processes of converting, these conversion enzymatic processes, they need these vitamins and minerals. I've always said it's all they are is cofactors. We have confused cofactors with processes. It's enzymatic processes that are taking place. But for the enzymatic process to take place properly, you need more protein, because protein furnishes the material for the body that needs to do things as well. So if you're not getting enough protein, you can't build enough of the nanomachines either. So there's a lot of aspects. We haven't teased everything out, but what it shows is the higher you move the protein, the lower the homocysteine goes. That's the important take-home message. It's not basically jugging down a whole lot of supplements of B12. Vegans have been doing it for some time, and it's not changing the it's getting worse because they're eating less protein. God, shark horror. Should be having a methionine-rich steak. That will lower the damn things. 69% of the variance could be explained by baseline homocysteine. That's a pretty good p-value. The possibility of that being by chance, unlikely at 0.0001. You know, possibility of 1 in 1,000, you know, that could be by chance, unlikely, okay? So the higher the p-value, the more likely there is some, you know, chance that something can, the lower that number is, the less likelihood. 2% by vitamin, so, you know, that's all 2%. That's all, basically, that's not a bad p-value. That's all B12 contributed. And another 2 in terms, another 2 potentially coming from weight loss. And that's even a worse p-value. So plasma homocysteine concentrations after 6 months were associated only with baseline, you know, these homocysteine. The only one that they were associated heavily were with the protein. That's what gave you the best p-value. All the other stuff was 2%, bit here, bit there. You know, it was basically, and that was also adjusted. So how much? These are cofactors. Yes, they're required for those processes to happen in the liver. But at the same time, you need the meat. You need the protein. A high protein, high methionine, yes. Nothing like high methionine, high protein. Yes, give me that steak. Diet does not raise homocysteine. Did you hear that, Vagoons? A high protein, high methionine diet in humans does not raise homocysteine concentrations compared with a low protein, low methionine diet in overweight subjects. Are we clear, Vagoons? It's your diet. It's protein deficient. It's shit. That is why you've got homocysteine levels off the charts and why you guys are degenerating and losing your marbles. It's quite clear. The take-home message, boys and girls, eat your fucking meat and eat more of it. Do not fear meat. Do not fear animal protein. It's healthy. It's, you know, it's required. The body responds better and will become healthier the more animal foods you eat. Do not fear them. Anyway, that's the take-home message. I hope you enjoyed some of the antics and the information. Take care. See yous.